is Mel. I worked in the Dominican Republic. I actually going to stand off to the side because I'm not so fun standing for podiums. But this was actually my third time coming back. And the first time I went with an SSI art class, we did a microfinance project, and I went the next summer to work with that same organization. It was transformative for me because I saw a lot of the business background that I was getting, the accounting, the finance classes that I thought were so boring and didn't want to pay attention to, completely made sense in that moment, which was fantastic. And then I went to Chile to study abroad, and I thought maybe I'd get a summer internship in Chile, but my mind was always going back to the Dominican Republic. And Dr. Mace, who I've never had class with before, but we're like best friends, connected me to a University of Richmond alum who did Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic. And once I spoke with him, he helped me find the perfect organization for me. So I wanted to do some research because I wanted to learn something new. My kind of specialty was economic development initiatives that people in these communities are starting. But I also wanted to be very hands-on because that's another incredible aspect of learning. So what I did, this time I learned about self-finance, savings, and credit communities. And in the nonprofit world, anybody that comes up with a model titles it whatever they want, but there's really 1,000 ways to say this. So they're essentially informal banking communities. The purpose for these things is that in the Dominican Republic, the eastern half of the country is essentially sugarcane plantations. And the type of people that work in these plantations are Haitian migrant workers who live in very rural areas, and it's incredibly expensive to get to town. So it's like $6 or $7 just for one trip. Or they don't have documentation because they're migrant workers. They've been living there for their entire lives, and there's some political things going on, and they cannot open a bank account. So for us, we kind of take that for granted because we all have bank accounts. We know how interest works. We know how loan payments work. But there's a lot of people that don't, and not having access to that doesn't help either, right? It keeps these people in kind of a darkness without having any financial literature. And if they were able to be in a position where they could open a bank account, they wouldn't understand the language, they wouldn't understand how it works. So in Spanish, the model is called Comunidades Autofinanciadas, so out of self-finance communities, excuse me. The organization I worked with was Community Enterprise Solutions, actually started by 2 investment bankers, so I thought that was cool. And yeah, I didn't know. The first thing that I did was I went to the country and trained for a little bit, and then I did some research. So this was a project I didn't know. I essentially used online resources because a lot of these projects are actually being implemented in Eastern Africa, and I knew it was very different. I just wanted to kind of build a framework and get context. And then once I started realizing how it worked, I designed the process because I'm a very ideas person for the people that work with me. So this is very hard. And I said, if I want to keep track of all these things, I need to write them down. So I created a manual knowing that it would change. And initially the manual was only based on my research, but it was essentially said, if we wanted to start these groups here, how could we do it? And it outlined the process of how the groups would work, I went into detail, like I drew little stick people on the manual, how they could sit, who was going to be in a leadership position. And I think what's important to point out in these groups, the main point is education and self-running these groups, right? So there's not somebody from an outside organization going into community, leading a meeting. I was training people based on what I had learned to be able to train others to do this themselves. And anything that they earned, any interest that they raised within that group was kept and divided amongst them. So it was teaching a lot of concepts like dividends and interest rates and monthly payments and how do you keep track of that. And although passion, which I think I have, are very essential to these kinds of things, it doesn't work if you don't keep track of the loans. It doesn't work if you don't keep track of the interest. And it definitely doesn't work if people are not understanding what's going on. And that's kind of the cycle that we wanted to break. We wanted to make the people in these communities be able to do this kind of stuff themselves. And then I gave a presentation to a bunch of community leaders. A lot of them are entrepreneurs doing fantastic things. And I said, hey guys, this is what I've learned. You live here, I don't. So let me tell you, what I know, and you tell me whether it'll work or not. It was an incredibly dynamic conversation. We sat down for 2 hours, and they were like asking me, what about race? What if somebody steals a little money? What if people don't want to pay? And that really forced me to challenge the model and to say, hey, this isn't like God's gift to earth or something. We can change this model and make it more useful. So with my communication and dialogue with them, we kind of created the model so that it worked best based on what they told me was going to happen. And these are, by the way, people who live in the communities, and oftentimes they're actually, lead social movements and are really involved. And then I trained them to know essentially what I had learned, because I realized, and this was a turning point in my project, I realized that I was going to leave in 2 months, and this had absolutely no value if I simply started a group or two and said, hey, this is really cool, I learned about the model, I started the group, and then I left. There was nobody would know how to run them afterwards because I wouldn't have taken the time. So I said, in recognizing my role, which I think is a lot what Rand talked about, I recognized that I wasn't going to be out talking to people and talking to communities and trying to get them to buy into what we were doing, but I was going to support and I was going to train others so that it continued to grow even after I left. I went to all the community meetings, I answered questions whenever I could, but I really saw my role kind of as a behind the scenes. Because do I know how to start these groups? No, they know how to start these groups a lot better than I do. So I wanted to make sure that we use their talents and their knowledge of the community as best as possible. So then we went and we pitched this idea to communities, and that was again a very dynamic conversation. They were super skeptical, and this was a turning point for me because the entire time when I was researching, I had come up with situations like, what if this happens? Okay, maybe we can, this will be the solution. If this happens, this will be the solution. And within 10 minutes of the community meeting, they had figured out everything that was worked a ton better than anything I had said, and broken through all of my theories and all of my solutions to something that really worked for them. And I thought how poignant for that, for that to happen, that I spent all this time theorizing, and it was completely inefficient and unnecessary because people could do that so much better. Within the context of all of this, I really needed to recognize the social things that were going on. There's a social movement in the Dominican Republic right now to give documentation to children that were born to Haitian parents because they currently don't have it. And the two people, Franklin and Natalie, that I trained, who are now coordinators and are now opening these groups, are actually part of that movement as well. And they are people who are born to Haitian parents and documents that are very much affected. The political scheme, which was, again, a lot of this kind of Haitian-Dominican dynamic that goes on. The ethical questions that arose throughout my project, and of course the economic, because we were working with people that were in destitute poverty, so things could change at any moment. Their entire economy is run by sugarcane, so whenever there's sugarcane, people are cutting and there's activity. Whenever there isn't, there's nothing moving around the community, so it's very difficult. This is a fun slide. Before I talk about this, I also want to talk about my host family. My homestay brother was someone who, he told me that I have to tell everyone that I meet that he pitches 92 miles an hour. So I'll let you know that. He was actually drafted to play for the Milwaukee baseball team, I don't know what the name is, but had some kind of issues along the way. And there's so many fantastic players in the Dominican Republic, if you don't get that chance, you miss it. But what he did is he now trains smaller kids in the neighborhood who have a lot of talent to pitch, and he gets a percentage of their contract or something. But I walked in the house, or I walked in the country, saying, oh, I don't like baseball, but saying that in the Dominican Republic is not really and he was like, I'm going to make you like baseball. So every day after practice, he would bring his bat that they use at practice, and then it was like 8 p.m. so you could barely see. We would walk around picking bottle caps up on the street, and that is how I learned to pitch. So and that's actually why a lot of Dominican players are really good, because they play with these like tiny bottle caps. Anyway, back to the project. There's, as a lot of things, there's the beginning, there's an end, and Dr. Howard kind of stole my thunder, but then there's like, so everything in life. And then there's some way that you get there. It's never linear, it's never easy. I think you face a lot of challenges, you see a lot of injustice, you develop relationships, you see some relationships can't develop, expectations are met or maybe they're broken. And the one thing we never talk about is failure. And that is so crucially important because that is 80% of how you learn, at least in my opinion. And I failed actually because in the beginning of the internship we said I was going to start 5 groups. And by the time that I was done, I had started 0. And I think it didn't go bad. I think initially, yes. But when I realized that in order to be comfortable with failure, and in order to use this knowledge to move forward, you really needed to redefine success. So instead of opening those 5 groups and leaving, I trained other people to be able to continue this process after I left. Dr. Dekti and I, she was my advisor during the summer, we also developed a database that I trained someone in the office to work on that essentially keeps track of all of the information on these groups. So we will know the amount of savings, the amount of loans, what interest rate has been developed, how many people. We also have the demographic information. And like I said, passion does a lot, but if you don't have these measures, then all of this can fall short. The other thing was being innovative. So this world is constantly changing, especially with people that live in incredibly vulnerable situations. You cannot say, hey, this is the model, this is what I think works, and no matter what else comes along, this is the best thing. You always have to be willing to do something better. Another one is flexibility. So I don't see this model as the end. I see it as a means to an end. So if anyone can be part of these groups and learn how to calculate interest and save and not stuff the money under the mattress where it loses value, they have the opportunity to go to a proper bank and a proper institution, that they can do so in a much more educated way. And the last thing is compassion. So I think none of this matters if we don't understand that people are at the center of everything that we do. And it's not about learning models, it's not about learning theories, it's really about connecting with people, responding to their problems, and not thinking that you know the answer or you know the solution. So I thought I was going to cry, and I didn't, so that's good. I'm a senior, so all of these things are very emotional time. But for those people that know me, I kind of tend to think of myself as a mosaic of the people that I've met, my family, and people in my life. And I can say after this experience, I feel like I'm a different person because of the people that touched my lives in this way. And they were incredibly bright, incredibly energetic, and they were vulnerable enough to connect with me and be compassionate with me, and I could help them do the same. So thank you for listening.